In the early 1970s, long before laptops fit into backpacks and software quietly ran the world, computers were massive, expensive machines locked inside universities, governments, and corporate laboratories. They were not personal, they were not friendly, and they certainly were not designed for ordinary people. At that moment in history, almost no one imagined that software would become more powerful than hardware itself. But two young minds were already thinking differently, and that difference would eventually change how the modern world works. Bill Gates grew up in Seattle, fascinated by logic, numbers, and problem-solving. From an early age, he showed an unusual ability to focus intensely on abstract ideas. Paul Allen, slightly older and equally obsessed with technology, shared the same curiosity. The two met as teenagers and bonded over computers at a time when access to them was extremely rare. These machines were slow, fragile, and incredibly expensive. Yet to Gates and Allen, they represented something revolutionary: the future. In 1975, a small event quietly reshaped history. A magazine featured the Altair 8800, a simple personal computer kit. It wasn't powerful, and it wasn't easy to use, but it was affordable enough for hobbyists. When Paul Allen saw it, he immediately understood its importance. He rushed to show it to Bill Gates, and together they realized something critical. The real opportunity wasn't the machine itself, it was the software that could make it useful. At the time, software was often treated as an afterthought, something given away with hardware. Gates and Allen believed the opposite. They believed software should be independent, valuable, and protected. Acting on this belief, they contacted the makers of the Altair and claimed they had developed a programming language for it. In reality, they hadn't finished it yet, but they worked relentlessly, coding day and night, until they delivered a functioning version of BASIC. That single decision marked the true beginning of Microsoft. The company was officially founded in 1975, built on a simple but powerful idea. Computers would become personal, and software would be the key to unlocking their potential. In the early years, Microsoft was small, scrappy, and intensely focused. Bill Gates was known for his demanding standards, attention to detail, and relentless work ethic. He believed that controlling software standards would eventually mean controlling the future of computing. As personal computers slowly entered offices and homes, Microsoft positioned itself strategically. Instead of building hardware, it focused entirely on software, allowing it to partner with multiple manufacturers at once. This decision would later prove decisive. While many competitors tied their fortunes to specific machines, Microsoft tied itself to an entire ecosystem. Real turning point came in the early 1980s, when IBM decided to enter the personal computer market. IBM was a giant, trusted and respected, and its move into PCs signaled that personal computing was no longer a hobby, it was the future. IBM needed an operating system, and Microsoft seized the opportunity. Rather than creating one from scratch immediately, Microsoft acquired an existing system, modified it, and licensed it to IBM as MS-DOS. This deal was more important than it appeared at the time. Microsoft retained the rights to license the operating system to other manufacturers as well. As IBM-compatible computers flooded the market, MS-DOS became the standard operating system across the industry. Microsoft didn't just ride the wave of personal computing, it quietly shaped it. Throughout the 1980s, Microsoft expanded rapidly. It introduced Windows, an interface that made computers easier to use and more accessible to non-technical users. Early versions were imperfect, but the vision was clear. Computing should be visual, intuitive, and universal. Over time, Windows improved, and with each version, Microsoft's influence grew stronger. What made Microsoft unique wasn't just technology, it was strategy. The company understood timing, partnerships, and scale better than almost anyone else in the industry. It focused on becoming indispensable. As more people used Windows, more developers built software for it. As more software depended on Windows, more users adopted it. This feedback loop created dominance. By the early 1990s, Microsoft was no longer a startup or even just a successful company. It was becoming a central pillar of the global digital economy. Offices, schools, and governments relied on Microsoft products daily, often without realizing how deeply integrated they had become. Software was no longer invisible, it was essential. Yet with success came scrutiny. Critics accused Microsoft of aggressive tactics, and unfair competition. Governments began to question whether any single company should wield so much influence over technology and information. These tensions would later explode into major legal battles, shaping both Microsoft's future and the rules of the digital age. But at its core, Microsoft's rise was not accidental. It was the result of foresight, ambition, and a deep understanding of where technology was heading. While others focused on machines, Microsoft focused on the invisible layer that controlled them. That choice transformed software into power and power into history. This is only the beginning of Microsoft's story. From courtroom battles to global dominance, from innovation to reinvention, the company's journey mirrors the rise of the modern digital world itself. And in the next part, we'll see how Microsoft navigated competition, controversy, and change as it shaped, and was shaped by the Internet age. As the 1990s began, Microsoft was no longer an ambitious software company trying to survive. It had become the backbone of the personal computer revolution. Windows was spreading rapidly across homes, offices, and institutions, turning Microsoft into a name that millions of people interacted with daily, often without thinking about it. But this decade would not only define Microsoft's dominance, it would also expose the risks of having too much power in a rapidly changing technological world. The release of Windows 3 marked a crucial moment. For the first time, Windows felt practical, stable, and useful to everyday users. It allowed people to multitask, use graphical interfaces, and run applications without needing deep technical knowledge. Businesses adopted it at scale, schools began teaching with it, and software developers increasingly designed programs specifically for Windows. This created a powerful cycle. More users attracted more developers, and more developers attracted more users. Microsoft was no longer competing on equal footing, it was setting the rules of the game. At the same time, Microsoft expanded beyond operating systems. Products like Microsoft Word, Excel, and later the full Office suite became industry standards. Offices across America and eventually the world standardized around Microsoft formats. Documents, spreadsheets, and presentations became dependent on Microsoft software, creating a form of digital lock-in that was subtle but extremely effective. Once an organization committed to Microsoft's ecosystem, leaving it became difficult and costly. As Microsoft's influence grew, so did its confidence. Bill Gates believed deeply in the company's mission and strategy, but he also believed that winning mattered. Internally, Microsoft was known for its intense culture. Meetings were aggressive, debates were sharp, and performance expectations were extremely high. This environment produced rapid innovation, but it also encouraged a mindset where competition was something to be crushed, not merely outperformed. The arrival of the Internet in the mid-1990s posed both an opportunity and a threat. Initially, Microsoft underestimated its importance. The company was focused on desktop software, while the web introduced a new platform that didn't fully belong to anyone. When Netscape released its web browser and quickly gained popularity, it became clear that control over the Internet's gateway could rival control over the operating system itself. Microsoft reacted with urgency. It developed Internet Explorer and integrated it deeply into Windows. From Microsoft's perspective, this was innovation and progress. From the perspective of competitors and regulators, it looked like abuse of power. By bundling Internet Explorer with Windows, Microsoft made it extremely difficult for rival browsers to compete. Most users simply used what came pre-installed, and Netscape's market share collapsed. This moment triggered one of the most significant legal battles in technology history. The United States government accused Microsoft of maintaining an illegal monopoly and using anti-competitive practices to suppress rivals. The antitrust trial became a public spectacle, exposing internal emails, strategies, and corporate attitudes. Bill Gates himself testified, and his defensive, combative demeanor became emblematic of the era. For the first time, Microsoft was not just a success story. It was a symbol of unchecked corporate power in the digital age. The trial raised fundamental questions about capitalism, innovation, and regulation. Should a company be punished for winning too effectively, or was Microsoft's behavior harmful to competition and consumers? The case divided public opinion and reshaped how governments viewed technology companies. Although Microsoft ultimately avoided being broken up, The legal pressure forced changes. The company became more cautious, more restrained, and more aware of public perception. The ruling didn't destroy Microsoft, but it marked the end of its most aggressive phase. The era of unquestioned dominance was giving way to an era of scrutiny and accountability. Meanwhile, technology itself was changing. The late 1990s and early 2000s saw the rise of new competitors and new paradigms. Open-source software challenged proprietary models. Companies like Google began building services around the web rather than the desktop. Mobile computing was on the horizon, even if few yet understood its significance. Microsoft, still focused on Windows and Office, found itself less agile than it had once been. Internally, Microsoft struggled with innovation outside its core products. While Windows remained dominant on PCs, the company missed or delayed several key trends. Attempts to dominate mobile operating systems failed to gain traction. Web-based services lagged behind faster-moving rivals. For the first time, Microsoft looked less like a revolutionary force and more like an incumbent trying to defend its territory. Yet even during this period, Microsoft's influence remained enormous. Its software ran governments, financial institutions, and critical infrastructure. Developers continued to rely on its tools. Enterprises trusted its stability. While consumer-facing excitement shifted elsewhere, Microsoft retained deep roots in the global economy. The transition from Bill Gates to new leadership symbolized a deeper shift. Gates gradually stepped back from day-to-day operations, and Microsoft began redefining its identity. The question was no longer how to dominate personal computing, but how to stay relevant in a world moving toward cloud computing, mobile devices, and interconnected platforms. This phase of Microsoft's history is crucial because it shows that dominance does not guarantee permanence. The same strategic brilliance that built Microsoft also created blind spots. Success can harden assumptions, and assumptions can slow adaptation. The company that once disrupted giants now faced the challenge of disrupting itself. Microsoft had survived its rise. It had survived government opposition. Now it faced a more subtle test, evolution. Whether it could reinvent itself without losing its foundation would determine its future role in the digital world. And that transformation, from powerful incumbent to adaptive survivor, would define Microsoft's next chapter. By the early 2010s, Microsoft stood at a crossroads that few outside the company fully understood. On paper, it was still one of the most powerful corporations in the world. Windows dominated personal computers, Office remained essential in workplaces, and Microsoft's revenues were massive. But beneath that surface strength, the technology landscape had shifted. Smartphones had changed how people interacted with technology. Cloud computing was redefining where data lived and how software was delivered. And companies that barely existed a decade earlier were now shaping the future. Microsoft had missed some of these shifts. Its mobile strategy failed to capture users. Its early internet efforts felt slow and fragmented. The company that once set the pace now appeared reactive. This moment marked one of the most critical transitions in Microsoft's history, not because it was collapsing, but because it had to decide whether it could fundamentally change its identity. That change began with leadership. When Satya Nadella became CEO in 2014, many observers underestimated the significance of the appointment. Nadella was not a loud or combative figure. He spoke calmly, emphasized empathy, and focused on long-term thinking. But his impact would prove transformational. He understood that Microsoft's future was not tied to controlling devices, but to empowering users across platforms. One of Nadella's first major shifts was cultural. Microsoft moved away from internal rivalry and rigid hierarchies toward collaboration and openness. The aggressive, win-at-all-costs mindset that had defined earlier decades was replaced with a focus on learning, adaptation, and partnership. This cultural change was not cosmetic. It directly affected how products were built and how the company interacted with competitors. Strategically, Microsoft pivoted toward cloud computing. Azure became central to the company's future. Instead of selling software as a one-time product, Microsoft focused on providing services that evolved continuously. Businesses could store data, run applications, and scale operations without owning physical servers. This model aligned perfectly with the changing needs of the global economy. At the same time, Microsoft made a bold decision to embrace platforms it once viewed as threats. Office was made available on iOS and Android. Microsoft supported open-source software, even contributing to it. These moves would have been unthinkable in earlier eras, but they reflected a new understanding. Relevance mattered more than control. If you're finding this transformation fascinating and want to understand how major institutions adapt under pressure, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It helps support deeper, more honest explorations of history and power, and it ensures you don't miss what comes next. Microsoft's acquisitions during this period further illustrated its shift. The purchase of LinkedIn signaled a move into professional networks and data-driven insights. GitHub brought Microsoft into the heart of global software development communities. These were not random purchases. They were strategic investments in ecosystems that shaped how people worked, learned, and built technology. What made this era remarkable was not just financial recovery, but narrative transformation. Microsoft was no longer viewed primarily as a monopolistic force. It began to be seen as a stable, trusted partner. Governments, enterprises, and developers relied on its infrastructure. The company positioned itself as neutral, reliable, and adaptable in an increasingly polarized tech world. Yet this transformation also raised new questions. Cloud dominance introduced concerns about data privacy, surveillance, and corporate influence over information. As Microsoft became deeply embedded in national infrastructure, healthcare systems, and defense contracts, its role expanded beyond technology into geopolitics and governance. Power had not disappeared, it had changed form. From a historical perspective, Microsoft's reinvention stands out because it contradicts a common pattern. Most dominant companies struggle to adapt. Microsoft did not abandon its past, but it reinterpreted it. The same emphasis on software that fueled its rise now powered its cloud strategy. The same focus on developers that once built Windows now supported global platforms. This phase of Microsoft's story shows that survival in history is not about strength alone. It is about timing, humility, and the willingness to rethink foundational beliefs. Empires fall when they cannot adapt. Institutions endure when they learn to evolve without losing coherence. By the late 2010s, Microsoft was once again central to the global technological order, but in a very different way than before. It was less visible to consumers, yet more deeply embedded in systems that mattered. Less aggressive, yet more influential. Less dominant in headlines, yet more essential in structure. And this sets the stage for the final question in Microsoft's historical journey. What happens when a company becomes not just a market leader, but a pillar of modern civilization itself? That answer belongs to the next chapter. As Microsoft entered the 2020s, it was no longer defined by consumer excitement or flashy products. Instead, it had become something far more consequential: infrastructure. Microsoft's software and cloud services quietly powered governments, hospitals, banks, military systems, universities, and global corporations. This kind of influence rarely attracts public attention, but historically, it is the most enduring form of power. Unlike earlier decades, Microsoft's strength now came from being invisible. Azure data centers formed the digital backbone of countless institutions. Office tools structured how decisions were written, shared, and archived. Identity systems, cybersecurity services, and enterprise software shaped how modern organizations functioned at their most basic levels. Microsoft was no longer just a company people used. It was a system people depended on. This transformation placed Microsoft in a unique historical position. Governments that once challenged it in court now signed long-term contracts with it. Militaries relied on its cloud infrastructure. Healthcare systems trusted it with sensitive data. These relationships blurred the line between private enterprise and public authority. Microsoft did not govern nations, but it enabled governance in the digital age. If this kind of quiet power interests you, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Understanding how influence shifts from visibility to infrastructure helps explain the modern world more clearly than headlines ever will. With this influence came responsibility and risk. Cybersecurity emerged as one of Microsoft's most critical roles. As cyber warfare, ransomware, and digital espionage became tools of state and non-state actors, Microsoft found itself on the front lines. Attacks on its platforms were not just technical issues, they were national security events. In response, Microsoft invested heavily in security research, threat detection, and global response networks. At the same time, Microsoft positioned itself as a mediator in the digital world. It advocated for digital norms, cybersecurity agreements, and protections for civilian infrastructure. Historically, this is significant. Few corporations have ever attempted to shape international norms without formal political authority. Microsoft's efforts reflected an understanding that its survival depended on a stable digital environment. The company's relationship with governments, however, remained complex. Defense contracts raised ethical questions. Data storage policies sparked debates over privacy and surveillance. As technology became inseparable from power, Microsoft faced the same dilemma that has confronted every influential institution in history: how to balance profit, responsibility, and legitimacy. Culturally, Microsoft continued to emphasize adaptability. Remote work tools expanded rapidly, especially during global disruptions. Collaboration platforms became essential, not optional. This shift reinforced Microsoft's role as an enabler of modern life rather than a driver of consumer trends. It was no longer trying to define how people felt about technology. It was shaping how they functioned within it. If you're appreciating this deeper, structural view of corporate history, subscribing ensures you won't miss future stories that go beyond surface-level narratives and examine how power actually operates over time. From a historical lens, Microsoft's evolution mirrors that of long-lasting institutions rather than fast-rising empires. It learned from confrontation. It adapted after overreach. It invested in systems rather than symbols. This is why, despite intense competition and rapid technological change, Microsoft remains central while many once-dominant companies faded. But permanence is never guaranteed. New technologies continue to reshape the landscape. Public trust can erode. Political environments shift. Microsoft's future will depend on how it navigates transparency, accountability, and innovation in an increasingly fragmented world. What makes Microsoft's story especially important is not just what it achieved, but how it changed. It moved from dominance to dependence, from control to integration. That shift may be its greatest achievement and also its greatest vulnerability. If this journey through Microsoft's rise, challenge, and reinvention has helped you see technology differently, like the video and subscribe. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it often rhymes, and understanding these patterns prepares us for what comes next. Microsoft today stands as a reminder that the most powerful forces in history are not always the loudest. Sometimes, they are the ones quietly holding everything together. As Microsoft's story moves toward the present, its true significance becomes clearer only when viewed through the lens of history. Many companies rise quickly, dominate briefly, and then fade as technology or public taste shifts. Microsoft's endurance tells a different story. It did not survive by clinging to a single product or era. It survived by repeatedly redefining what power meant in a changing world. In earlier centuries, power came from land, armies, and visible authority. In the industrial age, it came from factories and capital. In the digital age, power flows through systems, standards, and infrastructure. Microsoft understood this transition, sometimes instinctively and sometimes painfully, and aligned itself with the deeper currents of history rather than surface trends. Unlike companies built around cultural excitement, Microsoft built itself around necessity. Governments can change policies, consumers can switch brands, but institutions depend on continuity. By embedding itself into how organizations operate, store knowledge, communicate, and secure data, Microsoft became difficult to replace. This is not dominance through spectacle, but through reliability. If you find this long view approach to history valuable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It helps keep these deeper, slower stories alive in a world obsessed with speed. Yet history also teaches that permanence creates new risks. When institutions become essential, they attract pressure from every direction. Microsoft faces expectations not only as a business, but as a steward of digital civilization. Decisions about privacy, security, and cooperation with governments carry consequences far beyond shareholders. The comparison to historical empires is unavoidable. Like Rome, Microsoft built roads rather than monuments, digital roads that others travel daily. Like the British Empire, it standardized systems that enabled global exchange. And like all powerful institutions, it must constantly justify its role to those who rely on it. What separates Microsoft from many fallen giants is its willingness to accept limitation. It no longer seeks to control every layer of technology. Instead, it positions itself as a platform others can build upon. This restraint is strategic, but it is also historical wisdom. Overextension has destroyed more powers than competition ever did. The future will test this balance. New technologies will emerge. Political tensions will reshape global markets. Public trust will be challenged. Microsoft's survival will depend not on innovation alone, but on legitimacy. In history, legitimacy is earned through consistency, transparency, and adaptation. Lose that, and even the strongest systems weaken. If this exploration has changed how you see technology and power, subscribing ensures you won't miss future documentaries that connect the past to the systems shaping our present. Ultimately, Microsoft's story is not just about software or success. It is about how institutions learn, how they respond to resistance, and how they evolve when the world changes faster than their original vision. Microsoft did not simply ride the digital revolution. It learned to live inside it. History rarely offers clear endings. Instead, it leaves us with patterns. Microsoft's pattern suggests that the most influential forces are not always those that dominate headlines, but those that quietly organize reality itself. Whether Microsoft will remain such a force depends on choices still being made. And that is why its history matters. Not as a celebration and not as a warning alone, but as a case study in how power survives by changing shape. If you found this journey worth your time, like the video and subscribe. Understanding the past is the only reliable way to navigate what comes next.